Couple gone without a trace in mountains, found alive but unrecognizable. The morning of October 14, 2019, broke cold and clear over the Cascade Range in Washington state. Frost clung to the windshield of the silver Honda CR-V parked at the Thornton Creek trailhead, and the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to paint the peaks in shades of amber and gold. Inside the ranger station 3 miles down the mountain road, Ranger Marcus Webb was pouring his second cup of coffee when the call came in. "We've got an abandoned vehicle at Thornton Creek," the voice crackled through the radio. "Been here at least 24 hours. No emergency beacon activation. Keys still in the ignition." Marcus set down his mug, the familiar weight of concern settling in his chest. October was a dangerous month in the Cascades. The weather could turn in minutes, transforming a beautiful autumn hike into a fight for survival. He'd seen it happen too many times in his 15 years as a ranger. "I'm heading up there now," Marcus replied, grabbing his jacket and emergency pack. "Run the plates and see what we're dealing with." The drive up the winding forest road took 12 minutes. When Marcus arrived at the trailhead parking lot, he found the Honda exactly as described. Windows slightly fogged from the temperature drop, a light dusting of pine needles on the hood. He circled the vehicle slowly, his trained eyes taking in every detail. The doors were locked. Through the windows he could see a woman's purse on the passenger seat, a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, and a wadded-up trail map on the dashboard. His radio crackled again. Vehicle registered to Emma and David Castellano, ages 32 and 34. Address in Portland, Oregon. No priors, no red flags. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. A couple from out of state, probably inexperienced with the terrain. He pulled out his binoculars and scanned the trailhead sign, then the tree line beyond. The Thornton Creek Trail was moderate difficulty, a 7-mile loop that climbed to a scenic overlook before descending through dense forest. Popular with tourists, usually safe if you stayed on the marked path. Usually. "Dispatch, I'm initiating a search," Marcus said into his radio. "Contact the families and get me a photo of the missing persons, and check the weather reports from 2 days ago." "Copy that. Stand by." Marcus approached the vehicle again, this time peering more carefully through the windows. The purse was expensive-looking designer leather. The map had been hastily refolded, water-stained on one corner. On the back seat, he spotted 2 professional-looking cameras, one still in its case, one partially visible beneath a fleece jacket. These weren't casual hikers. They'd come prepared, at least equipment-wise. His radio buzzed with the weather report. "Dispatch here. We had a sudden storm system move through the area 48 hours ago. Temperature dropped from 55 to 38 degrees in less than an hour. Heavy rain, some sleet at higher elevations. Visibility was under 50 feet for approximately 3 hours." Marcus closed his eyes, running through the scenarios in his mind. A couple starts their hike in beautiful weather, gets caught in a sudden storm, becomes disoriented in the poor visibility, and loses the trail. It happened. It happened more often than the public knew. Within 2 hours, the parking lot had transformed into a command center. 3 sheriff's department vehicles, 2 volunteer search and rescue trucks, and a K-9 unit had arrived. Marcus spread a topographical map across the hood of his truck, marking the trail with a red marker. "The Thornton Creek Trail follows the ridgeline here," he explained to the assembled team of 15 searchers. "If they stayed on the path, they would have made it back. But if they deviated, especially during that storm, they could be anywhere in this quadrant." He circled a vast area of mountainside with his marker. That's roughly 12 square miles of wilderness, steep terrain, multiple ravines, dense forest cover. Deputy Sheriff Sarah Chen stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I just got the photos from Portland PD. Emma and David Castellano." She held the screen up for everyone to see. Marcus studied the image, a couple beaming at the camera, clearly in love. Emma had shoulder-length auburn hair, bright green eyes, and an infectious smile. David was tall, clean-shaven with dark hair and an athletic build. They were standing in front of what looked like Powell's Books in Portland, arms around each other, the picture of happiness. They'd been married for 6 years, Sarah continued, reading from her notes. Both work in graphic design. No medical conditions that would make hiking dangerous. Emma's sister says they were experienced hikers, had done trails all over Oregon. This was supposed to be a long weekend getaway. Supposed to be, someone muttered. Marcus divided the team into groups, assigning each a sector to search. The K9 unit, a German shepherd named Atlas with his handler, a woman named Jennifer Park, would start at the trailhead and follow any scent they could pick up. Remember, Marcus addressed the group, his voice firm. We're looking for any sign. Footprints, disturbed vegetation, torn clothing, dropped items. Call out every 15 seconds. Watch your footing and stay in radio contact. Nobody goes off alone. The same conditions that got them lost can get us lost too. The search began at 10:47 a.m. Atlas picked up a scent immediately, pulling Jennifer toward the trailhead with confidence. The dog's nose worked the ground, then the air, then the ground again. Marcus followed close behind with 2 volunteers, while the other teams fanned out to cover parallel routes. For the first mile, everything seemed normal. The trail was well maintained, marked with blue blazes on the trees every 100 yards. But then Atlas paused at a fork that didn't appear on the official map, a narrow deer path that split off to the left, barely visible beneath a tangle of ferns and fallen branches. This isn't on any trail map, Jennifer said, kneeling beside her dog. Atlas was whining, pulling toward the unmarked path. Marcus examined the ground. There, pressed into a patch of soft earth between 2 rocks, was the unmistakable tread pattern of a hiking boot, recent, maybe 2 or 3 days old, and beside it, another print, slightly smaller. We've got tracks, Marcus called into his radio. Possible deviation from the main trail at mile marker 1. 3. Following. The terrain changed quickly once they left the marked trail. The forest grew denser, the canopy overhead blocking most of the sunlight. Moss covered everything, making the ground treacherous. The path, if it could even be called that, wound between massive Douglas firs and around boulders the size of cars. Why would they come this way? One of the volunteers asked, breathing hard as they climbed over a fallen log. They probably didn't mean to, Marcus replied. In heavy rain and poor visibility, this might have looked like the trail. Or maybe they were trying to find shelter and got turned around. Atlas stopped suddenly, barking 3 times, his alert signal. Jennifer rushed forward and found something caught on a low-hanging branch. A strip of turquoise fabric about 3 inches long, fluttering in the breeze. Bag it, Marcus instructed. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to the photo of Emma and David. In the picture, Emma was wearing a turquoise windbreaker. They came this way. Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the radio. She'd been following with another group. We found more tracks about 100 yards east of your position. They're heading upslope. Marcus checked his GPS. They were now almost 2 miles from the trailhead, in an area that saw maybe 1 or 2 hikers per year. The terrain was getting steeper, rockier. Ahead, he could hear the sound of rushing water, Thornton Creek itself, swollen from the recent rains. The search continued for hours. They found more evidence, a granola bar wrapper, fresh scrapes on a boulder where someone had clearly scrambled up, more boot prints near the creek bank. But as the afternoon wore on and shadows began to lengthen, they found no sign of Emma and David themselves. At 5:30 p.m., with darkness approaching, Marcus made the call to suspend the search until morning. We'll camp at the trailhead tonight, he told the exhausted team. First light tomorrow, we go again. They're out here somewhere. That night, as Marcus sat by the campfire at the staging area, Sarah Chen joined him with 2 cups of coffee. The families are arriving tomorrow, she said quietly. Emma's parents and sister from Seattle, David's mother from California. They want to join the search. Marcus nodded, staring into the flames. We'll find them. People survive getting lost in these mountains. If they stayed together, stayed calm, found water. You've been doing this a long time, Marcus. Sarah interrupted gently. How many times have you found them alive after 3 days? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the statistics. After 72 hours, survival rates dropped dramatically, and with the temperatures they'd experienced, with the storm, with the terrain. His radio crackled. Weather update. Another system moving in tomorrow night. Rain, possible snow above 4,000 feet. Marcus and Sarah exchanged looks. The Castellanos had been missing for 3 days. If they were injured, hypothermic, unable to move. "We'll find them," Marcus said again, but this time his voice carried less certainty. By the end of the first week, the search had expanded to include over 60 volunteers, 3 helicopters and drone teams. They'd covered nearly 30 square miles, following every possible route the couple could have taken. They'd found more evidence, a broken compass, more fabric scraps, even a lens cap from one of David's cameras near a steep ravine. But no Emma, no David. Emma's sister, Rebecca, had set up a command tent at the parking lot, coordinating volunteers and managing the media attention that had begun to swirl around the case. Local news crews had arrived, then regional ones, then a correspondent from CNN. Marcus watched from a distance as Rebecca gave her third interview of the day, holding up a poster with Emma and David's smiling faces. "Please," Rebecca was saying, her voice breaking. "If anyone has information, if anyone saw them, heard anything, my sister is out there. Her husband is out there. They wouldn't just disappear." But they had disappeared. Completely. On day 9, the official search was scaled back. They'd exhausted all high-probability areas. The helicopters were needed elsewhere. The volunteers had jobs to return to, families to care for. Marcus and a core team of 5 continued, but even he knew the odds were now astronomical. "We're looking for remains at this point," Sarah said to him on day 12, her voice barely above a whisper. They were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out over a valley of dense forest. "You know that, right?" Marcus did know. But he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. Not with Rebecca still camping at the trailhead, not with David's mother calling him every evening for updates. The break came on day 14, and it wasn't what anyone expected. A group of experienced climbers had been exploring an area called Devil's Spine, a series of rocky outcroppings 3 miles north of where the Castellanos had last been tracked. It was outside the original search grid, considered too difficult and remote for inexperienced hikers to reach. One of the climbers, a man named Todd Brennan, was rappelling down a cliff face to photograph a rare species of falcon when he noticed something odd. A depression in the rock face, partially hidden by a curtain of vegetation. Curious, he swung over to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Tucked into a narrow crevice, barely visible from any angle, was a small cave opening. And just inside the entrance, so faded by sun and rain that it was almost invisible, was a piece of turquoise fabric tied around a stick. A marker, a signal that someone had been there. Todd radioed his climbing partner immediately. Within 30 minutes, they'd carefully made their way to the cave entrance. Inside, the cave extended back about 15 feet, with a narrow chamber that opened up just enough for 2 people to huddle together. And there, scratched into the rock wall with what looked like a piece of metal, were 2 words: "Help us." But the cave was empty. Whatever had happened to Emma and David Castellano, they were no longer there. Marcus arrived at Devil's Spine 90 minutes later, his heart pounding as he climbed the technical route to reach the cave. The moment he saw that scratched message, he knew 2 things with absolute certainty. Emma and David had made it this far. They'd been alive, at least long enough to leave a message. And somehow, impossibly, they'd left this place and gone somewhere else. The question that would haunt everyone for the next 2 years was, where? The discovery of the cave transformed everything. What had been a tragic search and rescue operation became something far more complex, a mystery that defied explanation. Marcus Webb stood inside the narrow chamber, his headlamp illuminating the scratched message on the wall, and felt the case shift beneath his feet like unstable ground. "They were here," Sarah Chen said, crouching near the cave entrance. "Look at this." She was pointing to a small pile of debris in the corner, empty granola bar wrappers, the same brand they'd found on the trail, a water bottle, cracked and dirty, and something else, A small notebook, its pages warped and stained but still partially legible. Marcus carefully picked up the notebook, handling it like the precious evidence it was. The cover was decorated with Emma's name in neat handwriting. Inside, the pages contained sketches, mountain landscapes, trees, a detailed drawing of the view from what must have been this very cave, and scattered throughout, brief journal entries. October 14th, Marcus read aloud. Got caught in storm, lost trail. David thinks we're north of the main route. Rain so heavy can't see 10 feet ahead. Found shelter here. We'll wait for weather to clear. He turned the page. The handwriting was shakier now. October 15th. Tried to find our way back, but terrain too dangerous. David hurt his ankle on the rocks. We have food for maybe 3 more days if we're careful. Someone will find us. They have to be looking by now. October 17th. Heard helicopter this morning but couldn't get their attention. We're too hidden here. David says we need to try to move, find a clearing. I'm scared. What if we get more lost? The entries stopped there. The rest of the pages were blank except for more sketches, increasingly desperate attempts to map their surroundings, to draw the landscape in hopes of figuring out where they were. Marcus looked up at Sarah. They left here. They made a choice to leave. But why? Sarah asked. This is shelter. They had water nearby. I can hear a stream from here. Why would they risk it? Because they thought they had a chance, Marcus replied. They heard the helicopter. They knew we were searching. They probably thought if they could just get to a clearing, get to higher ground, they could have gotten themselves killed, one of the rescue volunteers said from the cave entrance. This area is a death trap. Loose rock, sudden drops, no clear paths. If David's ankle was already injured. But there's no blood, Sarah interrupted, shining her flashlight around the cave floor. No sign of serious injury here. They left under their own power. Marcus stepped out of the cave and onto the narrow ledge, looking out at the vast expanse of wilderness stretching in every direction. From here, the forest looked like an endless green ocean, broken only by rocky outcroppings and the occasional glimpse of a distant peak. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. We expand the search, he said firmly. They left this cave between October 17th and whenever that notebook got too water damaged to write in. That gives us a timeline. We search every ravine, every valley, every possible route they could have taken from here. But even as he said it, Marcus knew the odds. The Cascade Wilderness contained thousands of places where 2 people could disappear without a trace. They could have fallen, been injured, succumbed to exposure, or, and this thought nagged at him constantly, they could still be out there somewhere, still trying to survive. The search resumed with renewed intensity, but also with a grim understanding. They were no longer looking for lost hikers who'd wandered off trail. They were tracking 2 people who had survived at least 4 days in brutal conditions, then made the desperate decision to leave their shelter and venture deeper into unknown territory. The media coverage exploded. The story had everything viewers craved: a young couple in love, a mysterious disappearance, a cryptic message scratched in stone. Cable news picked it up. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. Reddit threads sprouted like weeds, filled with amateur theories and armchair detectives. They were running from something, one theory suggested. Maybe they witnessed a crime. Maybe they were involved in something illegal. It's a hoax, another claimed. They staged their own disappearance. The cave is all theater. Mountain lion attack, and offered a third. They were injured, disoriented, wandered off, and were picked off by predators. Marcus tried to tune out the noise and focus on the facts. But facts were becoming increasingly difficult to establish. The trail of evidence had gone cold after the cave. Despite 2 more weeks of intensive searching covering an additional 40 square miles of terrain, they found nothing. No more fabric scraps, no footprints, no signs of passage. It was as if Emma and David Castellano had simply vanished into thin air. By December, the official search was called off entirely. The winter snows had come to the Cascades, making further efforts not just futile, but dangerous. Marcus stood in the ranger station, looking at the wall map covered in colored pins marking every location they'd searched, every piece of evidence they'd found, and felt the weight of failure settle on his shoulders. "We did everything we could," his supervisor said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No one could have done more. But it didn't feel like enough. It never did." Emma's parents held a memorial service in Seattle in January 2020. Marcus attended, standing in the back of the church watching as Rebecca delivered a tearful eulogy for her sister. David's mother sat in the front pew, her face carved from grief, staring at the two framed photographs that stood where coffins would normally rest. "They loved the mountains," Rebecca said, her voice echoing in the hushed church. Emma always said that's where she felt most alive, most connected to something bigger than herself. I guess in a way they'll always be there now. Part of the wilderness they love so much. Marcus left before the reception, unable to face the well-meaning condolences and the questions he couldn't answer. He drove back to the mountains, to the Thornton Creek trailhead, and sat in his truck as snow fell softly around him. The case officially remained open, but everyone understood what that meant. Open and cold, open and unsolved, open and hopeless. Life moved on, as it always does. The news cycle moved to other tragedies, other mysteries. The volunteer searchers returned to their regular lives. The equipment was packed away. The command tent came down. The parking lot at Thornton Creek returned to its usual state, empty most days, with the occasional car belonging to a hiker who didn't know the area's dark history. But Marcus couldn't let it go. Every day off, every free moment, he found himself back in those mountains, following new theories, checking areas that might have been overlooked. Sarah Chen joined him sometimes, though she thought he was developing an unhealthy obsession. "You can't save everyone, Marcus," she told him after one particularly fruitless 12-hour search, "and you definitely can't save people who've been missing for over a year." "We don't know they're dead," Marcus replied stubbornly. "We also don't know they're alive," Sarah countered gently. "At some point, you have to accept that we may never know what happened to them." The first anniversary of the disappearance came and went, then the second. The case became a legend among hikers and climbers in the Pacific Northwest, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the wilderness, about how quickly things can go wrong, about the thin line between a pleasant afternoon hike and a fight for survival. Emma's sister Rebecca started a foundation in their names, raising money for improved trail safety and emergency beacon programs. She gave talks at hiking clubs and outdoor recreation centers, showing the smiling photograph of Emma and David and urging people to take proper precautions. "Don't let what happened to my sister happen to you," she'd say. "Tell someone where you're going. Bring emergency supplies. Stay on marked trails. Turn back if conditions deteriorate. Your life is worth more than any view." Marcus attended one of these talks in September 2021, sitting in the audience of a mountaineering club in Seattle. Rebecca had aged visibly in the 2 years since her sister's disappearance. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a heaviness in her expression that never quite lifted even when she smiled. After the presentation, Marcus approached her. She recognized him immediately. "Ranger Webb," she said, and pulled him into a hug. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for never giving up." "I wish I had better news," Marcus said. "I wish I could give you closure." Rebecca shook her head. "There is no closure, not really. I've accepted that I'll probably never know exactly what happened in those mountains, but I can honor Emma's memory by trying to prevent it from happening to others." They talked for a while about the search, about the evidence, about the theories that still circulated online. Rebecca showed him something on her phone, a Facebook group with over 15,000 members, all dedicated to solving the mystery of the Castellanos disappearance. "People send me tips all the time," Rebecca explained. "Most of them are well-meaning but useless. Psychics claiming to have visions, conspiracy theorists with elaborate plots, amateur detectives who've cracked the case from their computer in Ohio. But I read every message just in case." "Just in case what?" Marcus asked gently. "Just in case one of them is real," Rebecca replied. "Just in case someone actually knows something." Marcus understood. Hope was a stubborn thing. Even when logic and experience said to let go, hope hung on with bloody fingernails. He drove home that night thinking about the cave, about the message scratched into stone. Help us. 2 words that had launched hundreds of hours of searching, thousands of man-hours, countless prayers and vigils and news reports. 2 words that had ultimately led nowhere. But 3 weeks later, on October 7th, 2021, 2 years and 3 weeks after Emma and David Castellano had set out on what should have been a routine day hike, everything changed. A group of recreational hikers, led by an experienced guide named Tom Morrison, was exploring an area called Whisper Canyon, approximately 6 miles northeast of Devil's Spine. The terrain was extremely challenging, a narrow gorge with steep walls and a creek running through the bottom. Few people ventured there because the approach was technical and the route poorly documented. Tom's group included 5 clients, all reasonably experienced climbers looking for a challenge. They also brought Tom's dog, a mixed-breed rescue named Bandit, who loved the mountains almost as much as Tom did. About 2 hours into their descent into the canyon, Bandit suddenly became agitated. The dog started barking frantically, pulling against his leash, trying to drag Tom toward a section of the canyon wall that looked completely impassable, a sheer face of rock draped with dead vines and scrub brush. "What's got into him?" one of the clients asked. Tom tried to calm Bandit, but the dog was insistent, whining and barking and pulling with all his strength. Years of experience had taught Tom to trust his dog's instincts. Bandit had once alerted them to an injured hiker miles from any trail. Another time he detected a weak spot in what looked like solid ground, potentially saving Tom from a serious fall. "Stay here," Tom instructed his group. He clipped into his safety rope and began working his way across the rock face toward where Bandit was pulling. As he got closer, he noticed something odd. What had looked like an impenetrable wall of vegetation was actually concealing a narrow fissure in the rock. A crack, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. And emanating from that crack was a smell that made Tom's stomach turn. The unmistakable stench of human waste and decay. "I need everyone to move back," Tom called to his group, his voice sharp with sudden authority. "Now." He pulled out his satellite phone and dialed 911, then wedged himself carefully into the fissure. The crack extended back about 8 feet, then opened up into a small chamber, a natural cave formed by the erosion of softer rock behind the harder outer layer. What Tom saw in that chamber would stay with him for the rest of his life. 2 figures huddled against the back wall, barely human in appearance. Emaciated to the point that their bones pressed sharply against skin that had been burned nearly black by the sun. Hair grown so long and matted that it looked like strange dead plants growing from their scalps. Beards. Both of them had beards, Tom would later tell police, though he couldn't tell which one had been the man originally. Clothing reduced to tattered rags barely covering their skeletal frames. And the eyes. Tom would never forget the eyes. Huge in their sunken sockets, reflecting his flashlight beam like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. Empty of recognition, empty of hope, empty of almost everything human. One of them made a sound, a low animal whimper that sent chills down Tom's spine. "Jesus Christ," Tom breathed. "I need emergency services at Whisper Canyon immediately. I found them. I found the missing hikers." The figures didn't respond to his voice, didn't seem to recognize that rescue had arrived. They just stared at him with those hollow, terrifying eyes, shrinking back against the cave wall as if he were a threat. Tom backed out of the fissure, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. His clients were staring at him, questions already forming, but he held up a hand to silence them. "Call for backup," he said to his most experienced climber. "Medical emergency. 2 individuals found alive but in critical condition. And," he paused, trying to find the right words, "tell them to bring psychological support. These people, they're not going to be okay." The emergency response to Whisper Canyon was the largest mountain rescue operation Washington State had seen in over a decade. Within 90 minutes of Tom Morrison's call, 3 helicopters were circling the area, 1 medical evacuation bird, one carrying a technical rescue team, and one from the local news station that had monitored the emergency radio frequencies and smelled a major story. Marcus Webb was off duty, 40 miles away at a hardware store, when his phone exploded with notifications. The first text was from Sarah Chen. They found them, Whisper Canyon, alive. Marcus dropped the paint cans he'd been holding. His hands went numb. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was reading. 2 years, 723 days since Emma and David Castellano had disappeared into the mountains. Alive. He was in his truck and racing toward Whisper Canyon before his brain fully caught up with his body. The drive took 45 minutes but felt like hours. His phone kept buzzing. Text from other rangers, calls from reporters who'd somehow already gotten his number, a voicemail from Rebecca that he couldn't bring himself to listen to yet. By the time Marcus arrived at the staging area Tom Morrison had set up near the canyon entrance, the place was swarming with personnel. Paramedics were rigging ropes to lower a stretcher into the gorge. A county sheriff was trying to keep growing media presence at a distance. And standing near the edge, wrapped in an emergency blanket despite the mild October afternoon, was Tom himself, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 hours. "Marcus," Tom said when he spotted the ranger. They'd worked together on rescues before. "Man, I don't even know where to start." "Are they really alive?" Marcus asked, needing to hear it confirmed again. "Technically, yes," Tom replied, and something in his tone made Marcus's stomach drop. "But Marcus, they're not the same people who went into these mountains. I don't think they even knew I was trying to help them. They looked at me like I was a predator, like something that was going to hurt them." Marcus moved to the edge of the canyon and looked down. A team of 4 paramedics was carefully making their way through the fissure Tom had described, carrying specialized equipment for moving patients in confined spaces. He could hear their voices echoing up from below, calm and professional, but he couldn't make out the words. Sarah Chen appeared at his elbow. "I spoke to the lead paramedic before they went down," she said quietly. "He told me to prepare for the worst. Said Tom's description suggested severe malnutrition, dehydration, likely infection, possible organ damage from prolonged starvation." "But they survived," Marcus said. 2 years, Sarah. How is that even possible?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But we're about to find out." It took 45 minutes to extract the first survivor from the cave. The paramedics moved with excruciating caution, treating their patient like they might shatter at any moment. When the stretcher finally emerged from the fissure, Marcus had to turn away. The person on that stretcher, and he couldn't tell if it was Emma or David, couldn't recognize anything human in the skeletal figure wrapped in thermal blankets, weighed maybe 90 pounds. Their skin was a patchwork of extreme sun damage, peeling and scabbed and darkened to leather in places. The hair was a wild, matted tangle reaching past their shoulders, filled with dirt and what looked like small twigs. The nails on the visible hand were cracked and overgrown, curling slightly like claws. But it was the sound that broke Marcus's heart. As the paramedics loaded the stretcher onto the helicopter, the survivor began to whimper, a high, keening noise that didn't sound like it came from a human throat. Their eyes were squeezed shut against the daylight and their entire body was trembling. "It's okay," one of the paramedics was saying, her voice gentle and soothing. "You're safe now. We're getting you help. You're safe." But the survivor didn't seem to hear or understand. They just kept making that terrible sound. The second extraction took another hour. This survivor was in slightly better condition, could sit up on their own, though barely. But the same devastating physical deterioration was evident. Skeletal frame, damaged skin, wild hair and beard, that same look of primal fear in their eyes. When both helicopters had lifted off toward Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, Marcus stood in the sudden quiet of the canyon and tried to process what he'd just witnessed. "I need to see that cave," he said to Sarah. "The sheriff isn't letting anyone else down there until they've processed it as a scene," Sarah replied. "But Tom gave me his statement while you were watching the extraction. Marcus, there's almost nothing in that cave. Some rags that might have been clothing. A few bones, looks like small animals, maybe rabbits or squirrels. Some kind of crude container they'd use to collect water. That's it. That's all they had for 2 years. How did they survive? Marcus asked again, though he was no longer sure he wanted to know the answer. The media frenzy that erupted over the next 72 hours made the original disappearance coverage look tame by comparison. Every major news network led with the story. Miracle in the mountains, missing couple found alive after 2 years. Against all odds, hikers survive 700 days in wilderness. The Cascade survivors, a story of endurance and mystery. But as more information emerged from the hospital, the tone of the coverage began to shift. Harborview Medical Center held its first press conference on the 3rd day. Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, the lead physician treating the survivors, stood before a bank of cameras and microphones, her expression grave. "I can confirm that the 2 individuals rescued from Whisper Canyon are indeed Emma and David Castellano, identified through fingerprints and dental records," she began. "Both patients are alive and in stable condition, though they suffered severe malnutrition, dehydration, and exposure-related injuries. Emma's current weight is 87 pounds. She's lost approximately 50 pounds from her normal body weight. David weighs 93 pounds, a loss of approximately 65 pounds. A murmur ran through the assembled reporters. Dr. Gonzalez held up a hand for quiet. "Both patients are suffering from a condition we call refeeding syndrome, which occurs when nutrition is reintroduced to severely malnourished individuals. We have to increase their caloric intake very gradually to avoid serious complications. They're also being treated for multiple infections, severe sunburn covering approximately 60% of their body surface, dental decay, parasitic infections, and various vitamin deficiencies." "Can they talk?" a reporter called out. "Have they explained what happened?" Dr. Gonzalez's expression grew even more somber. "That's the most concerning aspect of this case. Neither Emma nor David has spoken since their rescue. They respond to basic stimuli, they react to light, sound, touch, but they show extreme signs of psychological trauma. They appear to have developed an acute fear of human contact. When approached by medical staff, they exhibit behavior consistent with severe PTSD, hyperventilation, trembling, attempts to hide or make themselves smaller. They avoid eye contact completely." "Are they going to recover?" another reporter asked. "Physically, we're cautiously optimistic," Dr. Gonzalez replied. "With proper nutrition and medical care, their bodies can heal, but psychologically." So she paused, choosing her words carefully. "We've brought in Dr. Raymond Foster, one of the country's leading experts in trauma psychology and prolonged isolation. He'll be better equipped to address the mental health aspects of their condition." Dr. Foster joined the press conference the following day, a silver-haired man in his 60s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He'd previously worked with prisoners of war, hostages, and survivors of extreme abuse. "What we're seeing with Emma and David is consistent with what's called captivity trauma, though in this case the captor was the wilderness itself," Dr. Foster explained. "Prolonged isolation, chronic fear, near-starvation conditions, and the constant stress of survival can fundamentally alter brain chemistry and psychological functioning. It's similar to what we see in prisoners who've been held in solitary confinement for extended periods." "But they had each other," a reporter pointed out. "They weren't completely isolated." "That likely saved their lives," Dr. Foster acknowledged. "But it doesn't prevent the trauma. In fact, being trapped in extreme conditions with another person can create its own complex psychological dynamics. They may have developed a shared reality that's completely divorced from normal human experience. We're seeing evidence that they created survival routines, coping mechanisms, and ways of thinking that made sense in their cave, but don't translate to the outside world." "Can you give us an example?" someone asked. Dr. Foster hesitated. "Emma has to be sedated during daylight hours because she becomes extremely agitated. We believe she may have adapted to a largely nocturnal schedule in the cave, emerging only at night to minimize sun exposure and conserve energy. David hoards food. He tries to hide his meals under his pillow, in his clothes, anywhere he can. He doesn't seem to understand that more food will come. His brain is still operating under survival scarcity. When will they be able to see their families? A reporter called out. We're working toward that, Dr. Foster said carefully. But it has to be done gradually under controlled conditions. Right now, any unfamiliar face triggers a fear response. We're using a very slow desensitization process. The same staff members, the same routines, building trust incrementally. Even their own family members will be strangers to them in many ways. The first family visit was arranged 12 days after the rescue. Rebecca, Emma's sister, was chosen to go first because she was assessed as the most emotionally stable family member. Marcus was present as an observer, standing behind one-way glass in an observation room at the hospital. The meeting took place in a carefully designed space. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, no sharp corners or threatening elements. Emma was brought in first, accompanied by two nurses she'd become somewhat accustomed to. She was dressed in loose, comfortable clothing, her hair partially brushed but still wild and damaged. She moved slowly, hesitantly, like every step required conscious thought. When Rebecca entered the room, Emma's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She made that whimpering sound Marcus remembered from the rescue, backing away until she hit the wall, then sliding down to a crouch, her arms wrapped protectively around her head. Emma, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. Emma, it's me, it's Becca. I'm your sister. But Emma didn't seem to hear or understand. She stayed in her defensive crouch, trembling violently, making small, wounded animal sounds. Rebecca took 3 steps forward, then stopped when Emma's whimpering increased in pitch. I'm not going to hurt you, Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. Emma, I love you. We've been looking for you for so long. You're safe now. You're safe. The visit lasted 8 minutes before Dr. Foster ended it, judging that Emma was becoming too distressed. Rebecca emerged from the room in tears, leaning heavily on Sarah Chen, who'd accompanied her for emotional support. She didn't know me, Rebecca sobbed. My own sister looked at me like I was a monster. Marcus felt his own eyes burning. This wasn't the miracle reunion everyone had hoped for. This was something darker, more complicated, a rescue that had come too late to save the people Emma and David used to be. David's first family visit, with his mother Christine, went marginally better only because David's response to stress was withdrawal, rather than visible fear. He sat in a chair, staring at his hands while Christine talked to him for 15 minutes. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her presence, but he didn't flee or cry out, which the doctors counted as progress. My son is in there somewhere, Christine told reporters afterward, her face a mask of determined hope. I have to believe that. With time, with love, with proper treatment, he'll come back to us. But privately, Dr. Foster was less optimistic. In a meeting with Marcus and the investigative team 3 weeks after the rescue, he laid out the reality of the situation. We need to understand that Emma and David may never fully recover their previous personalities and functioning, he said bluntly. 2 years of survival trauma has rewired their brains at a fundamental level. They learned to think and behave in ways that kept them alive in that cave, but those same adaptations make it nearly impossible for them to function in normal society. What kind of adaptations? Sarah asked. Emma has developed an extreme sensitivity to light and sound. Her sensory processing is completely altered. David shows signs of dissociation, mentally checking out for hours at a time. Both of them display hypervigilance that borders on paranoia. They can't sleep through the night because their bodies are programmed to wake every few hours to check for danger. They have trouble recognizing their own reflections in mirrors. The physical changes have been so dramatic that their brains don't register the images as themselves. Dr. Foster pulled up photographs on his laptop. Emma and David from before the disappearance, smiling and healthy, next to recent hospital photos. The contrast was shocking even to Marcus, who'd seen them at the rescue. The before images showed 2 attractive young people in their prime. The after images looked like concentration camp survivors, or people who'd aged 50 years in 24 months. Beyond the physical changes, there's the question of what they experienced during those 2 years, Dr. Foster continued. We've tried gentle interviews, but both of them become severely distressed when asked about their time in the wilderness. Emma has only spoken 3 words since her rescue: dark, water, and cold. David has spoken even less, just makes nodding or shaking motions in response to yes or no questions. Do we have any sense of how they survived? Marcus asked. What they ate, how they got water, how they avoided freezing in winter? We're piecing it together from physical evidence and observation, Dr. Foster replied. The cave provided shelter from the worst of the elements. There's a small stream nearby where they could access water. They clearly foraged. We found evidence of plant material in their digestive systems, though they were eating things that would make most people violently ill. Small animals, insects, probably scavenged carrion at times. Their immune systems are incredibly compromised, but they built up tolerance to pathogens that would kill most people. What about winter? Sarah asked. Whisper Canyon gets heavy snow. We don't know, Dr. Foster admitted. That's one of the mysteries. The cave would have been freezing and they had no proper clothing, no fire-making tools that we found. The working theory is that they used extreme caloric restriction and huddled together for warmth, possibly entering a state similar to torpor. Not quite hibernation, but a dramatic slowing of metabolic processes. Their bodies show signs consistent with this: damage to extremities from repeated frostbite, changes in their brown fat deposits, alterations in their thyroid function. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. They essentially evolved to survive conditions that should have killed them. That's not inaccurate, Dr. Foster said. Human beings are remarkably adaptable when faced with extreme circumstances. But there's always a cost. Emma and David adapted to survive in the wilderness. But in doing so, they've become partially unable to survive in civilization. They're like feral children, except they had adult minds that understood what they were losing even as they lost it. The investigation into how Emma and David had ended up in Whisper Canyon, 6 miles from the cave where Marcus's team had found their notebook, revealed a harrowing picture of desperation and gradual deterioration. A forensic team examined the route between Devil's Spine and Whisper Canyon, finding subtle traces of the Castellanos' passage. More fabric scraps, primitive shelters they'd constructed and abandoned, even what appeared to be a makeshift calendar scratched into a boulder. 147 marks before the scratches became too erratic to count. They were trying to get back to civilization, Marcus explained to Rebecca during one of her visits to the hospital. They left that first cave thinking they could navigate out, but the terrain defeated them. Every time they thought they were heading toward the trailhead, they were actually going deeper into the wilderness. And with David's injured ankle, with their dwindling supplies, they couldn't move fast enough to cover the distance before they had to find shelter again. So they were lost that whole time? Rebecca asked. For 2 years, they were just wandering? Not wandering, Marcus corrected gently. Surviving. At some point, probably after the first few weeks, they would have realized they weren't going to find their way out. So they stopped trying to escape and started trying to stay alive. That cave in Whisper Canyon became their home because it had everything they needed: shelter, water nearby, and a location remote enough that they weren't constantly exposed to predators or harsh weather. But why didn't they signal? Rebecca's voice rose with frustration. We flew helicopters over those mountains for weeks. We had search parties everywhere. How did we miss them? Marcus had asked himself the same question 1,000 times. The terrain, he said finally. Whisper Canyon is in a geological dead zone. Steep walls on all sides that block sightlines and muffle sound. And they were so far off any established trail that our search grids never extended that far. We were looking for people who'd been lost for days, not people who'd been surviving for months. By the time we would have expanded the search to include Whisper Canyon, winter had shut everything down. So we gave up on them, Rebecca said bitterly. We thought they were dead, Marcus replied, the words heavy as stones. Every statistical model, every expert opinion, every piece of evidence said they couldn't have survived more than a few weeks at most. Continuing the search beyond a certain point would have been sending more people into danger to recover remains. Nobody thought they could still be alive after a year, let alone 2. But they had been alive, barely, painfully, traumatically alive. And now the world was watching to see if Emma and David Castellano could somehow find their way back to humanity, or if they'd remain forever trapped between 2 worlds, unable to return to the wilderness that had become their home, unable to adapt to the civilization they'd lost. The rehabilitation process stretched across months that blurred into a year. Harborview Medical Center became Emma and David's new kind of wilderness, a place of routine, careful approaches, and incremental progress measured in tiny victories that would have seemed insignificant to anyone who hadn't seen how far they'd fallen. Marcus made weekly visits to the hospital, ostensibly to assist with the ongoing investigation, but really because he couldn't stay away. He'd spent 2 years searching for these people, 2 years haunted by their smiling faces on missing person posters, and now he felt a responsibility to witness their struggle back to whatever life they could reclaim. Dr. Foster welcomed his presence. "You represent continuity," he explained to Marcus. "You were there for the search, the rescue, and now the recovery. That matters to them, even if they can't articulate it." By January 2022, 3 months after the rescue, Emma had gained enough weight to no longer look skeletal. Her hair had been carefully trimmed by a stylist who specialized in trauma patients, cutting away the damaged, matted portions while preserving length where possible. She'd progressed from barely tolerating human presence to accepting touch from her regular care team, small victories like allowing a nurse to take her blood pressure without sedation, or letting Dr. Foster sit beside her during their sessions. But the damage ran deeper than physical appearance. Emma's speech remained minimal and fractured. She could manage short phrases. "Want water? Too bright? Where David?" But complex communication remained beyond her grasp. Her voice, when she did speak, was hoarse and uncertain, like someone relearning a forgotten language. The relationship between Emma and David had become one of the most fascinating and heartbreaking aspects of their condition. Hospital staff kept them in rooms on the same floor, and after the first month, Dr. Foster began supervised contact sessions. The transformation when they saw each other was remarkable and unsettling. Emma, who flinched from most human touch, would immediately reach for David. They'd huddle together in the corner of the room, arms wrapped around each other, communicating in a language that consisted more of gestures and sounds than words. They'd developed their own system of communication during their time in the wilderness. Clicks of the tongue, specific hand movements, pressure touches that conveyed meaning no one else could interpret. "They're their own society of 2, Dr. Foster observed during one session, speaking quietly to Marcus through the observation window. "They went through something no one else on Earth can truly understand. That bond is incredibly powerful. It probably kept them alive, but it also makes reintegration more difficult. They don't need the rest of us because they have each other." David's recovery followed a different trajectory. While Emma's trauma manifested as fear and withdrawal, David's took the form of what Dr. Foster called aggressive protectiveness. He was docile and compliant until he perceived any threat to Emma, then he'd transform into something primal and dangerous. A nurse found this out accidentally when she tried to give Emma an injection while David was present. David launched himself between them with a guttural snarl that didn't sound human, his emaciated body somehow generating enough force to knock the nurse backward. It took 3 orderlies and a sedative to calm him down. After that incident, the hospital implemented a strict protocol. Emma and David's medical procedures happened separately, with neither present to witness the other's distress. It was more complex logistically but essential for everyone's safety. The media coverage continued relentlessly, though the tone had shifted dramatically from miracle story to something more complex and uncomfortable. Reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping for glimpses of the survivors. Tabloids ran increasingly sensationalized headlines. Cave couple unable to recognize own families. Lost hikers may never recover. The ones who came back wrong. Rebecca fought back against the coverage with fierce determination. She appeared on morning shows, gave interviews to serious journalists, and used her foundation's platform to educate the public about trauma recovery. "My sister is not a freak show," she said during one particularly passionate interview. "She's a human being who survived an unimaginable ordeal. The fact that she's struggling to readjust doesn't make her less worthy of dignity and respect. If anything, it should make us more compassionate about what survival really costs." But even Rebecca struggled with the reality of Emma's condition. During family therapy sessions, carefully orchestrated encounters where Emma was gradually reintroduced to the people who loved her, Emma would stare at Rebecca with recognition, but no apparent emotional connection. She knew Rebecca was her sister in the same way she might know a fact she'd memorized. Abstract information without feeling attached. "It's like talking to a stranger who happens to look like Emma," Rebecca confessed to Marcus during one of his visits. "She'll answer questions if they're simple enough. She'll smile sometimes, though it never reaches her eyes. But there's no warmth, no connection. The sister I knew, her humor, her personality, the way she'd laugh at my terrible jokes, that person isn't there anymore." Emma's parents found the situation even harder to process. Her father, Robert, visited once and couldn't bring himself to return. "That's not my daughter," he told his wife afterward, and though she argued with him, she understood what he meant. The woman in that hospital room shared Emma's DNA and her approximate features, but the essence of who Emma had been seemed to have been left behind in that cave. The psychiatric evaluation reports painted a clinical picture of the damage. Both Emma and David showed severe PTSD, dissociative disorders, and what Dr. Foster termed survival identity override. Their personalities had been fundamentally restructured around the single goal of staying alive, and they couldn't seem to restructure back. Their sense of self eroded over time, Dr. Foster explained during a case conference that Marcus attended. In the beginning, they were Emma and David, two individuals with histories, preferences, dreams for the future. But as months became years, as every waking moment focused on survival, those individual identities became luxury items they couldn't afford. They became us instead of me and you. They became the ones trying not to die. He pulled up brain scans on the presentation screen. You can actually see the neurological changes. The amygdala, the fear center, is hyperactive in both patients. The prefrontal cortex, which handles complex decision-making and personality, shows reduced activity. And the hippocampus, which processes memory and spatial navigation, has actually shrunk slightly. These aren't just psychological changes. Their brains have been physically altered by prolonged trauma. "Is it permanent?" someone asked. "We don't know," Dr. Foster admitted. "The human brain has remarkable plasticity, especially in younger individuals. With intensive therapy, stable environment, and time, we may see some recovery. But expecting them to return to who they were before? That's probably unrealistic. Think of it like a severe physical injury. You can heal, you can adapt, you can build a new life, but you're never quite the same person you were before the accident." By April 2022, 6 months post-rescue, the hospital began preparing Emma and David for transitional housing. They couldn't live independently, might never be able to, but they'd progressed enough that continued hospitalization wasn't appropriate. The plan was to move them to a supervised facility designed for trauma survivors, where they'd have private space but constant support. The transition was rocky. Emma had panic attacks when shown photographs of the new facility. David refused to pack any of his belongings, apparently convinced they were being tricked or abandoned. It took 2 weeks of daily visits to the new location, short trips where they'd spend 30 minutes in their future rooms before returning to the hospital, before they could tolerate the idea. Rebecca decided to document the move for a long-form article in a major magazine. She'd partnered with an experienced journalist who specialized in trauma stories, hoping that a thoughtful, in-depth piece might counteract some of the more exploitative coverage. Marcus was present the day they moved, helping carry boxes of donated clothing and personal items. The new facility was in a quiet suburb outside Seattle, a converted house with 6 private suites and 24-hour staffing. Emma and David would share a suite. Dr. Foster had determined that separating them would be more harmful than helpful at this stage. Watching Emma walk through the door of her new home, Marcus was struck by how small she still looked. She'd gained weight, her hair was clean and styled, her skin had healed from the worst of the sun damage. To a casual observer, she might look like any other young woman, but there was something in the way she moved, cautious, alert, always aware of exits, that marked her as different. "What do you think?" Rebecca asked Emma, gesturing around the living space. "Do you like it?" Emma's gaze traveled slowly around the room, taking in the comfortable furniture, the windows with their soft curtains, the bookshelf stocked with easy readers and art supplies. "Safe," she said finally. Then, after a pause, "David?" "He's right here," Rebecca assured her, as David emerged from the bedroom looking equally uncertain. "You're both going to live here together. You'll have help whenever you need it, but this is your space." The first few months in the transitional facility brought new challenges and surprising progress. Emma developed a routine that the staff learned not to disrupt. She'd wake at dawn, spend 30 minutes sitting by the window watching the sunrise, then retreat to darker spaces for most of the day. At night, she'd become more active, sometimes staying awake until 3 or 4 in the morning. She's still operating on the schedule she developed in the cave, Dr. Foster explained during a progress review. Daytime meant danger, exposure to sun, potential discovery by predators, energy expenditure in heat. Nighttime meant safety and activity. Her circadian rhythm has been completely rewired. David showed different adaptations. He became obsessed with food storage, turning one closet in their suite into a carefully organized cache of non-perishable items. The staff allowed it. Trying to break the behavior only caused him severe distress. He needed to know that resources were available, that starvation wasn't an imminent threat. But there were victories too. Emma began attending art therapy sessions and discovered she could still draw. Her artwork was haunting, dark, primitive images of caves and mountains, and 2 small figures huddled together. But the act of creation seemed to soothe something in her. She'd spend hours with pencils and paper, filling page after page with images from her memory. David started speaking in full sentences again, though his vocabulary had noticeably simplified. Complex thoughts eluded him, but he could express basic needs and preferences. He formed a tentative bond with one of the facility's counselors, a man named Robert, who'd been a wilderness guide before becoming a therapist and understood the mountains in a way that resonated with David. "You did what you had to do," Robert told David during one session, after David had finally begun opening up about the caves, about the hunger, about the decisions they'd made to survive. "You're not less human because you adapted. You're remarkable because you found the strength to do what was necessary." The documentary that emerged from Rebecca's collaboration hit PBS and streaming platforms in September 2022, nearly a year after the rescue. Titled "The Ones Who Came Back," it was a thoughtful, sometimes difficult examination of what survival really means and what it costs. The documentary included interviews with Marcus, Dr. Foster, the rescue teams, and extensive footage of Emma and David in their transitional housing. Rebecca had insisted on showing the reality, not romanticizing the struggle but also not exploiting it. Viewers saw Emma having a panic attack when a car backfired outside. They saw David's food hoarding behavior. They saw the blank, disconnected look that came over both of them when asked about their time in the mountains. But the documentary also showed the small moments of humanity. Emma laughing, actually laughing, at something David said in their private clicking language. David carefully braiding Emma's hair with a gentleness that contradicted his protective aggression. The two of them sitting together on their small patio at dusk, holding hands, watching the sky change colors with something that almost looked like peace. The documentary's most powerful moment came during an interview with Rebecca, filmed 6 months into Emma's recovery. She was asked if she'd gotten her sister back. Rebecca was quiet for a long time, tears streaming down her face. "No," she finally said. "I didn't get my sister back. The Emma I knew, the one who'd stay up all night planning our next adventure, who'd sing terribly off-key in the car, who'd call me at 2 a.m. when she had an exciting idea, that Emma is gone. She died in those mountains. She paused, collecting herself. But I've been given the gift of knowing a different Emma, someone who survived impossible odds, someone who learned to live in darkness and cold and fear and still held on to enough of herself to come back, someone who looks at a sunrise like it's a miracle because she remembers mornings when she wasn't sure she'd live to see another one. That Emma is worth knowing too. She's worth fighting for, even if she's not the sister I lost. The documentary sparked national conversation about trauma, survival, and the limits of recovery. It won awards. It changed minds. It made Emma and David's story about more than just shock value. It made it about humanity's capacity to endure and the price we pay for endurance. By the spring of 2023, 18 months after their rescue, Emma and David had progressed to the point where they could handle supervised outings. Marcus arranged to take them back to the mountains, not to the sites of their survival, but to an easy, accessible trail near a ranger station where he could ensure their safety. Rebecca was skeptical. Is this a good idea? The mountains are where their trauma happened. The mountains are also where they lived for 2 years, Marcus countered. Part of them might still be there. Part of them might need to see that they can exist in that environment without being trapped in it. The outing was scheduled for a clear May morning. Marcus picked them up at their facility, along with Dr. Foster and 2 support staff. Emma and David were quiet during the drive, staring out the windows at the landscape that gradually shifted from suburban to forest. When they reached the trailhead, a gentle nature walk that looped through old-growth forest, Emma's reaction was immediate and unexpected. She got out of the van, took a deep breath of the mountain air, and her entire body seemed to relax in a way Marcus had never seen before. "Home," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice. Not quite joy, not quite sadness, but recognition. Deep, cellular recognition. They walked slowly, letting Emma and David set the pace. Neither seemed afraid. If anything, they moved through the forest with a confidence they'd never shown in the transitional facility. David touched trees as they passed, running his fingers over the bark. Emma paused to examine plants, her artist's eye studying the way light filtered through the canopy. At one point, they left the trail entirely, moving into the underbrush with purpose. Marcus started to follow, but Dr. Foster stopped him. "Let them go," he said. "This is their world. They need to know they can still navigate it." They found Emma and David 15 minutes later at a small creek, sitting on rocks with their shoes off, feet in the cold water. They were talking to each other in their clicking language, and for the first time since the rescue, they looked genuinely happy. "They don't fit in our world anymore," Dr. Foster observed quietly. "But they haven't completely lost their connection to the wilderness either. They exist in between. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the best outcome we can hope for." The outing became a weekly event. Every Saturday, weather permitting, Marcus would bring them to the mountains. They never went deep into the backcountry, never anywhere that might trigger memories of the caves, but they spent hours in the forest, and with each visit they seemed to reclaim a little more of themselves. Emma started speaking more during these outings, pointing out plants she recognized, describing, in halting, simple language, how they'd used various resources to survive. David would add details, the 2 of them collaborating to tell a story that was still too painful to voice completely, but needed to be acknowledged. By the summer of 2023, 2 years after their rescue, Emma and David had achieved a kind of stability. They would never be independent in the way most adults are, would never hold jobs, never live without support, never fully reintegrate into the society they'd left behind. But they'd found a way to exist that honored both who they'd been and who they'd become. The facility had become their home in truth rather than just location. They had routines they could manage, staff members they trusted, and each other. Emma's art had evolved, still dark, still processing trauma, but showing signs of hope too. Small flowers appearing in corners of her cave drawings, light beginning to penetrate the darkness she depicted. David had started working with Robert to create a wilderness survival guide, not from an expert's perspective, but from someone who'd lived it. His insights were basic but profound. The importance of shelter over food, the psychological value of routine, the way hope could be rationed like calories. Rebecca visited every week, and the relationship with her sister had evolved into something new. Not the close bond they'd shared before, but a different kind of connection built on acceptance rather than expectation. She'd learned to appreciate Emma's small smiles, her occasional jokes, the moments when something like the old Emma would flash through. Marcus continued his weekly mountain outings with them, watching as they slowly, incrementally, made peace with the wilderness that had both nearly destroyed them and kept them alive. He'd come to understand that rescue wasn't a single moment when helicopters arrived. Rescue was an ongoing process, a daily choice to keep trying, keep healing, keep moving forward even when the path ahead was unclear. The final scene of Rebecca's documentary, she'd filmed additional footage for an extended edition, showed Emma and David sitting on Marcus's favorite overlook, a safe, accessible viewpoint that offered a stunning vista of the Cascade Range. The camera captured them from behind, two figures silhouetted against the mountains, holding hands. "Do you think they'll ever fully recover?" the interviewer's voice asked off camera. Rebecca's answer came after a long pause. "I think they already have," she said. "Not recovered to who they were, that's impossible, but recovered to who they are now. They survived something that should have killed them. They came back from a place most people never return from. They're changed, yes, unrecognizable in some ways, even to themselves. But they're here. They're alive. And they're finding ways to be okay with the people they've become." She paused, watching her sister and brother-in-law on that distant overlook. Maybe that's what recovery really means. Not going back to before, but learning to live with after. The documentary ended with Emma turning slightly toward the camera. For just a moment, there was something in her expression. A ghost of the woman she'd been, mixed with the survivor she'd become. She didn't smile, but she didn't look afraid either. She looked like someone who'd stared into the abyss and emerged with the knowledge that she could survive anything, even if survival meant becoming someone new. The final text on screen read, "Emma and David Castellano continue their recovery in Washington state. They remain in supervised care but make regular visits to the mountains." When asked if they regret that October day in 2019 when they set out on what should have been a simple hike, Emma's answer was surprisingly simple. "We lived." For survivors like Emma and David, sometimes living is enough. Sometimes it's everything. Marcus turned off the television in his ranger station, where he'd watched the documentary's premiere. Through his window, the Cascade Mountains rose against the darkening sky, beautiful and terrible and indifferent to the human dramas that played out in their shadows. He thought about Emma and David out there for 2 years, becoming people their own families couldn't recognize. He thought about the cost of survival, about what we give up to keep breathing, about the ways trauma reshapes us into something both more and less than we were before. And he thought about tomorrow's outing, when he'd pick them up again and bring them back to the mountains, because despite everything, despite the trauma, the loss, the profound changes, they needed this place. It had broken them, yes, but it had also remade them into people who understood something most of us never learn, that survival isn't pretty or triumphant or heroic. It's ugly and desperate and transformative. Emma and David had gone into those mountains as one thing and come out as another. They'd been lost and then found, and in some ways they were still both. Still lost even as they'd been located. Still searching even as they'd been rescued. But they were alive. Against all odds, against every reasonable expectation, against nature itself, they were alive. And sometimes, Marcus had learned, that has to be enough.